Serious, what was the crime that rocked the community you grew up in? U/NDNKNG responded. I grew up in a suburban town outside Ok. We had like one homeless man. He lived this way by choice and was known as Bicycle Bob, self-appointed nickname. A lot of us teens were friends with him since we would go to the parks to smoke and drink, and he regularly would be camping there. After I graduated, found out some high school kid thought it would be funny to stab him to death. Was shocked to know he had died that way. U/lets_be_stoned responded. A kid murdered his own brother in my town years ago. Police found the knife buried in the backyard. His parents, to this day, do not believe he did, despite him admitting it and going to prison. They still pay to put up billboards around the town looking for help finding their son's killer. The brother who did the killing is now out of prison. A combo of insane and depressing. U/Im in jeopardy responded. I grew up in Puerto Rico in the 90s. In 1999, a little boy named Rolandito Jucino went missing. He was playing in a park near his home and he just vanished without a trace. It's still an unsolved mystery. It scared the crap out of all our parents, especially us kids who were around the same age as Rolandito. My mom didn't let me play outside by myself for years. Because there was no evidence and no suspects, people came up with their own theories. Everything from organ harvesters, sex trafficking, to satanic cults. At some point, Rolandito's stepdad was suspected of killing him, but nothing could be proven. His mom still shows up in our local news every once in a while, asking people to come forward with information and saying that she still has faith that he's alive somewhere. It's truly heartbreaking. U/Donnie responded. There was a boy who had a profound disability and was essentially a 14-month-old in a 15-year-old's body. He would walk around my school with his caretaker and collect recycling to take to the bins, and would walk down the halls with his caretaker. One day after graduation, I was at lunch with my mom and sibling, and my phone started lighting up as well as my sister's. Apparently the boy's father had taken him for a walk to the woods next to their house and murdered his son and then himself with a nail gun and a knife. To this day, I think his father decided that ending his son's life was a mercy killing, as we later learned that his respite care and benefits were cut and the family was left with no support and no financial ability to provide for the growing needs of this young man. U/Right-Hand-Wolf responded. I grew up a little bit of all over, but I still remember being a kid in the Chicagoland area in the 1970s. I was really stoked, because it was Friday, December 22nd, 1978, the last day of school before Christmas break. I walked home from Cooper Junior High, thinking about how awesome a mug of hot chocolate was gonna taste as Elle stretched out in front of the TV in the basement, watching some amazing Spider-Man or Incredible Hulk cartoons. I made a cup of Swiss Miss and turned on the TV. HMMMPH. No cartoons on channel 32, and you know what? Every local channel was showing pretty much the same thing. Something that looked like a very well-guarded construction site. Extremely well-guarded. Lots of uniformed cops at this house. Chicago PD, Cook County Sheriff's Office, Des Plaines PD, and about a dozen troopers from the Illinois State Police. This was the afternoon when the search and methodical deconstruction of John Wayne Gacy's house began. Over the course of the next 8 days, investigators would recover the remains of 29 bodies. U/_Hootie Sissers responded. We had a local driving school that almost all the kids in our high school and neighboring schools used. There were 2 driving instructors who looked surprisingly similar, bald, short and sporting 70s porn stocks, except one was black and the other was white. Both my sister and I were assigned the black instructor, who took us out on multiple drives. About 5 years after graduation, the white instructor was arrested for raping dozens of girls in the class during their drives. No one knows how many victims this man actually had. I just keep thinking, if he attacked one of the 200 girls in my class alone, she never said anything. Probably suffered in silence, thinking she was the only one. Edit. I've posted this before, in case anyone's wondering. U/Brilliant responded. The Harvey family murders on New Year's Day, 2006. LVE lived in Richmond most of my life, and I spent my entire childhood and adolescence here. That brutal murder rocked the city to its core. Stuff like that just didn't happen here. Were we the murder capital of the US in the 90s? Sure, but that was mostly gang and drug-related violence. Not random families being tortured and murdered in their basement. They owned and operated a well-known toy store in a cute shopping district of the city too, and it's still there to this day. Every New Year's Day, people still leave flowers on the sidewalk in front of the store. Every year, by the end of the day, the pile of flowers still reaches a pretty large size. Those murders scared the shit out of the entire city, And I'm so happy the killers were caught and put to justice. You/shit-faced grizzly bear responded. The longtime mayor got busted in a gay prostitution sting. He'd been the mayor for over a decade. His wife was a first-grade teacher at the public school. Was my first-grade teacher and my older brother's. Unfortunately for him, the gay masseuse, prostitute, who he went to had a criminal history, and the cops were investigating him for not disclosing that he had HIV. So the mayor was just collateral damage to that investigation. I think the prostitute guy ended up going to prison for failing to disclose his HIV, prostitution, and blackmail. Mayor got arrested, but he never spent any time in prison. Funny thing was that this was not surprising at all to a lot of us. He would always come by the public pool in the summer, where a lot of the high school athletes would work as lifeguards. He never paid the girls any mind, but he'd always strike up conversations with us boys. We'd joke that he was definitely gay. Turns out he was, or at least bisexual. You/Ashton8177 responded. My community is primarily elderly population. Over 60% of residents are considered senior citizens. My father was a doctor in this area. He was the only one who dealt with pain patients. Pain patients are people who have chronic pain issues. They are known to constantly ask for more pain medication. No other local doctors would touch them. This was back in the 90s before an overall awareness of the opioid epidemic. I do not want to discuss that with this post. One of his patients was trading his pain meds for harder drugs. This guy tried to cheat the person he was selling to, and they ended up executing him in the woods. Somehow the local paper decided that my dad was the head of a statewide drug ring and had this guy killed. They wrote a multi-page story on it, and to show how contentious it was, the author didn't sign their name to the story. This, along with other things, caused an investigation into my dad's practice. The investigation took 2 years, and he didn't practice during that time. This left a majority of our community without a doctor to treat them. He was cleared of all wrongdoing, but going forward he could not write a script for pain meds without a secondary doctor's approval. He decided to stop treating them. TLDR, local guy selling pain meds for stronger drugs gets killed for cheating drug dealers, messes up whole county's medical care system. You/Mussing_Rose responded. My mom's murder, Ohio. Nothing like that ever happened in our town. To this day people still remember it. This happened back in the 70s. 15-year-old neighbor boy stabbed her to death. His sister was one of my best friends, sleepovers, second family type of thing. The paramedics stood over her naked body as she bled out. The cops knew he did it, but they didn't get around to arresting him until the next day. They didn't read him his rights, botched the investigation. The sightseers started driving by that day and didn't stop for a long time. He only had to serve time till he was 18. He tried to escape a few days before his release, got extra time, served till he was 21. Of course the family wasted no time putting the blame on mom, said the two of them were having an affair and that it was demonic fueled. Gratefully there was very little news reported, even though there were plenty of news people there. This would never happen now, but I was able to keep the news reporting to a minimum. I threatened to sue. I was 18 at the time. Now I'll tell you the craziest thing. A few years ago my daughter ended up in a psychiatric ward. She met the uncle of the kid that murdered mom. He was actually younger than the kid. His older sister had him later. I babysat this uncle for a while. Now mind you, this uncle was around 2 to 3 years old when this happened. He told her everything that happened, the whole demonic truth. She chose to believe him. You/Cowboy's house responded. 2 standouts for my town, within and months of the other. First, a girl being stabbed to death in a stairwell at school by her ex-boyfriend, because she refused to go to prom with him. She was also dating someone else. Part that kills me most is the killer admitted to his school psychologist that he was having schizophrenic thoughts, and the counselor only brought it to his parents' attention after the fact. This was huge for us since we were the next town over, and something of that caliber was unheard of until Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. A decade later, and it's still consistently one of the hardest things to talk about with virtually anyone in the community. I had a patient who I was helping with brain-based therapies after the fact because she called out that day to pick up her son from college, effectively leaving a substitute to teach her class that day, who ended up being a victim of the shooting. The patient's husband was also a cop that responded to the shooting. Just all around, anyone you ask has a story or connection to this. You/Zelasidialgrass9 responded. I was little at the time, so I wasn't aware of anything. Even if I was aware, I wouldn't have understood it. A 13-year-old was brutally stabbed more than 13 times by a 17-year-old. Her body was dumped in a field. 17-year-old was the typical mommy and daddy has money type. Parents supported him every step of the way and even moved from the area to begin a new life and get him away from all the media frenzy. It wasn't long after the move that the parents got the second and third shock of their lives that proved their precious baby boy wasn't innocent. While the parents were out one night, the 17-year-old brutally raped his sister and beat his brother to death and then slashed his throat. Thankfully, the sister was able to escape and get help. The 17-year-old had an attitude of, "Yeah, I killed 2 people. What about it?" Thankfully, he's spending life in prison. He hasn't seen the light outside of the prison walls since the early 90s, and the only time he will leave is when he's carried out in a bag. U/Hebaro 1953 responded, "We lived with my grandmother until we bought a house 2 doors down in 1961. When she died in 1976, a family bought it and lived there for 28 years. They sold it to a couple with 2 school-age children, a boy and a girl. One day, after they'd lived there for a couple of weeks, he picked his kids up from soccer practice, filled them full of Benadryl, drove them to a large pond a couple of towns over, slit their throats and threw their bodies in the pond. When his wife asked where the kids were, he bashed her brains in my childhood bedroom, with a hatchet, and threw her body in a small river in a neighboring town. I was friendly with the guy who spotted her, Conan O'Brien's first cousin, a landscaper at the time. Philip Seguin." U/Queen Bee 1986 responded, "Mel Ignato and the fact that he literally got away with the murder of his ex-girlfriend Brenda Sue Schiefer. He was tried for her murder and was found not guilty. Years later he sold his house, and during renovations, the new owners found pictures of him torturing and murdering her. But since he was already tried and found not guilty, they couldn't try him again. They tried him for perjury and gave him the harshest sentence they could, which was only like 10 years or something. He got out early for good behavior. After he got out he came into the pharmacy I worked at once a month to get his medications. He eventually died, but dealing with him, even once a month, creeped me out." U/Phenom Goober responded, "Music teacher for the elementary school had child porn on his computer and supposedly photos of students that attended that school over the years. If I recall correctly, the student photos weren't nude, but they were his trophies collection. Anyways, his wife ends up finding his stash and reports him to the FBI and started the divorce process. She was playing piano at a local church when he caught wind of all of this and lost his collective shit. He went to the church, entered from the side door near the piano, shot her in the head, then shot himself. Looking back, I always got some bad vibes from this dude. Stopped taking drum lessons because the scruples were out of control." U/Eli Notelli responded, "Work at a farmer's market. Come in one morning to a very somber mood. Some people are crying. One vendor's stall is just gone. Turns out one of the most beloved farmers we had was murdered. Never found out if there were drugs or alcohol involved, but apparently his dad shot him, called 911, and was dead himself by the time anyone got there. This guy was young. Had a wife and 2 kids under 10. But there is a small bright side to this. The community rallied around this family. The GoFundMe for his funeral got 5 times the asked for amount on the first day it opened. Other market workers volunteered at his farm to care for the animals and provide maintenance. So many people signed up to bring meals that there was a wait list of months. Everyone made damn sure that his family would be taken care of." U/No Feedback 6697 responded, "There was a young guy, I believe 19 or 20 years old, who worked the overnight shift at a local grocery store in my hometown. I don't remember his name, and honestly it's probably better to not blast it around and give the guy even more notoriety. He ended up coming in with a gun and shooting most of his co-workers one height. Turns out he was pretty disturbed, he had an obsession with a certain cartoon and made online videos with some pretty violent details, had a whole online persona, and had been planning the shooting for a while. I worked overnight front desk shift at a hotel just down the road from the store, and watched the news coverage the whole last couple hours of my shift. I remember driving past the store going home at around 7 a.m. and the place was just packed with police cars. Just a very eerie, sad feeling, and I didn't even know any of the victims personally, just that general sense of dread and heartbreak for their families. It's a fairly small town, not much crime ever happens, let alone something of that nature. It definitely caused a lot of pain and shook the whole community. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, you might enjoy the rest of my content. Check it out.